Shana Tova, everyone. I think we're all praying for that happy, healthy, and more peaceful new year. I think there's no doubt our prayers are quite fervent. And when I first started working on my remarks for Rosh Hashanah this morning, like most of us, I thought COVID-19 would be moving into our past. But because of the Delta variant, other variants on the horizon, many of us have used up our reserve of faith and hope for a worry-free, COVID-free, peaceful new year. How many of you have seen the wonderful movie My Cousin Vinny? Right? One of my favorites. I love the magic grits more than any other scene, but I think most of us feel like we're locked inside that metallic mint green 64 Buick Skylark that was stuck in the mud. Because COVID also makes us feel helplessly stuck in the mud. And no matter how much we step on the gas, one wheel spins and the other wheel does absolutely nothing. We live each day with fear, uncertainty, a sense of powerlessness in the face of this continuing global pandemic. COVID-19 has shaken our sense of faith, hope, and confidence in a peaceful future. Sometimes we feel so blinded by the present, we can't imagine anything other than the mud we're stuck in. We don't see a clear road ahead. We don't know how to power our way out of the mud. And even when we think we know what to do, we can't figure out the right combination of how much we need to step on the gas to free ourselves and how much we need to depend on faith and hope that God sees us, knows us, cares about us, and will pull us to freedom. And it's always a combination of both. This is exactly the situation in the story of Hagar that was in our Torah portion this morning. As you recall, God affirmed his famous covenant to Abraham that he would be a father of nations. At the time, Abraham was 99. His wife, Sarah, was 90 years old. Abraham had faith and trusted God. But because of their advanced age, Sarah had doubts. She suggested Abraham take Hagar, her Egyptian handmaiden, as a second wife in order to bear a child. And soon after, Hagar gave birth to Ishmael. But then Sarah and Abraham had their child, Isaac. And Sarah considered Ishmael a threat to the secure future of Isaac. God instructed Abraham to take Hagar and Ishmael to the desert and leave them there with only bread and water. Abraham was upset, but because he had faith, he delivered the message to Hagar with unshakable resolve. And that morning, Hagar's entire world turned upside down. Hagar suddenly became a refugee, forced to leave behind everything familiar, even the support system that had protected her. All Hagar and Ishmael had was what they could carry on their backs. We can imagine the weight of the situation on Hagar's shoulders. We can imagine the weight crushing her heart. We can imagine her questioning how Abraham and Sarah could cast them out. We can imagine the promise that had been Ishmael's and Hagar's future slipping away. Without faith in the future, there's no hope. And we can imagine Hagar's fear, her shock, her distress. Hagar stumbled through the desert, feeling hopeless, struggling to breathe, tears running down her face. All those years, she and Ishmael had only known wealth, honor, and love. And with the arrival of Isaac, it was all torn asunder. It was unfair and completely beyond Hagar's control. Hagar wandered in the harsh heat of the desert, terrified and thinking, how will I provide for my son Ishmael? Who will take care of us? Where will we go? And day by day, Hagar's plight worsened. Her future was as desolate as the desert itself, with no life or water anywhere in sight. The Torah describes it this way: Hagar, with her son Ishmael, wandered aimlessly in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water was gone, Hagar put the boy in the shade of a bush where he lay crying. Hagar sat down about 100 yards away. She didn't want to watch her son die. And without faith and hope, Hagar couldn't foresee anything positive happening. But then God heard Ishmael crying. And God sent an angel to Hagar. And the angel asked, "What's wrong?" And with great compassion, the angel listened to Hagar's plight. Embracing Hagar, the angel said, "Don't be afraid. God has heard the cries of your son. Go to your son, comfort him. Tell him God will also make him a great nation from his own descendants." Hagar heard these words but couldn't see any positive future. She thought that she and Ishmael will certainly die of thirst. But then a drinking well appeared. Our tradition teaches that this drinking well didn't magically appear. It existed all along. Hagar didn't see it because she had lacked faith and hope. But God opened her eyes to what was in front of her and ignited hope in the future. When Hagar finally saw the well, her actions became clear. Instantly, she filled her container with water from the well and shared the water to revive her son. The rabbis tell us that this story teaches us that the weight of our circumstances can mask our faith and blind us to the hope of a positive outcome. Faith allows us to trust, to open our eyes to the positive possibilities so we can see the hope of a new and better life. Faith is our starting point. There's a modern midrash that tells the story of two men, Shlomo and Buz. Shlomo and Buz were two of the many Israelite slaves that Moses was leading out of Egypt to freedom. Shlomo and Buz were so well trained to be slaves that they only looked down, never up. They'd grown so accustomed to looking down in submission, they didn't even think of lifting their eyes. So when Moses led the Israelites across the parting of the Red Sea, all the other former slaves of Pharaoh witnessed the great miracle. They witnessed God separating the Red Sea. They witnessed the crossing as escaping to a better future. But Shlomo and Buz, they couldn't look up. They couldn't see any of this. They walked behind the other slaves, looking down, and all they could see was mud. Shlomo said to Buz, "What's all the fuss about freedom?" And Buz agreed. It doesn't make sense. We had mud in Egypt. We have mud here. Shlomo and Buz completely missed the miracle of their escape. The sea split before their eyes, and they only looked down and saw mud. Even though they were moving, they were stuck in the mud. And unfortunately, being stuck in the mud characterizes the rest of their journey. The other freed Israelites stood at Mount Sinai in the presence of God. They heard God's voice proclaiming the commandments. The other freed slaves looked up to the heavens and saw God's outstretched arm offering them the sacred covenant. The other freed Israelites looked up with faith and pulled themselves out of the mud by accepting God's covenant and pledging themselves to become a holy people, God's partners in healing the world. But Shlomo and Buzz, they couldn't look up. Shlomo and Buzz couldn't hear God's offer of hope. Shlomo asked Buzz, "What do you hear?" And Buzz answered, "I hear someone shouting commandments." Shlomo said, "Yeah, I hear commands too. And what's this business of Torah? They shouted commands in Egypt, they shout commands here. What's the difference?" So Shlomo and Buzz missed the miracle of God's voice. They missed seeing the outstretched arm that could have pulled them out of the mud. After 40 years of wandering in the desert, the Israelites arrived at the promised land, the land of milk and honey, the land promised to our ancestors. All the Israelites rejoiced, all except Shlomo and Buzz. Shlomo asked Buzz, "How do you feel?" Buzz answered, "My feet hurt." And Shlomo said, "Yeah, my feet hurt too. And what's all this about a promised land? I don't see anything different. My feet hurt in Egypt, and my feet hurt here." So this modern midrash tells us that the Israelites returned to the promised land where God's promise to our ancestors was fulfilled. But Shlomo and Buzz missed it all because they were still stuck, only able to look down, only able to see mud. And because they were blind and deaf to the opportunity God offered to change their circumstance, and because their feet hurt from the struggle of their 40-year journey, they turned away from the promised land. They started to walk back to Egypt, the place in their minds that they had never left. And walking away from the promised land, they wandered for the rest of their lives in the wilderness, only looking down at the desert sand and complaining to each other. These two men were so stuck in the mud of their life circumstances that they were unable to physically and metaphorically escape. Faith gives us a forward spin that thrusts us out of the mud we feel mired in. And then it's our job to choose an action plan that moves us towards a positive future. Because Shlomo and Buzz looked down and saw only mud, they missed the opportunity to a future full of hope. Shlomo and Buzz never knew even that they were stuck in the mud. And I worry that we too might fall into the trap that made it impossible for Shlomo and Buzz to free themselves from the mud of their trapped lives. I worry that we too may remain slaves to what is comfortable and miss the promise of our future. I worry that we too risk wandering about with our eyes cast down, missing a change in the circumstances that surround us because we may not have enough faith to look up. Looking down keeps us stuck in the mud. Last night I told the story of the rare white tiger named Mohini, and some of you were here last night, but you'll indulge me to share it again. This white tiger named Mohini was a gift given to President Eisenhower, the American people, in 1960. And it's a story worth repeating because Mohini lived in the Washington Zoo, spending her days pacing back and forth in a confining 12 by 12-foot cage. Even though the zoo later built a large outdoor park enclosure so Mohini could run, climb, explore, when Mohini was introduced to her expansive new home, the white tiger didn't rush out. The white tiger didn't adapt eagerly to her beautiful new habitat. Instead, she confined herself to one familiar corner of the enclosure and wore into the grass a 12 by 12-foot square that was approximately the same size as the small cage she had been confined in before. Until her death, Mohini lived in the limited space she allowed herself inside the larger compound that had been created for her. Mohini was stuck in the mud. So what can we learn from these stories? From Hagar's story, we learn that faith is trusting that God sees us. God never abandons us, and God gives us hope. Hope motivates us. Hope spurs us to action. Hope guides our intention to create a better future. Hope motivates us to change our circumstances. From the Midrash about Shlomo and Buzz, we learn that our perspective may be so limited that even after 40 years of exposure to hope-filled opportunities, we will stay stuck in the mud. And from the story of Mohini the tiger, we learn that our conditioning may be so strongly entrenched that even when stringent boundaries are lifted, we imprison ourselves. So to move forward in our new year, to get unstuck from the mud of the past, we need faith, we need hope, and we need action. And what best characterizes the action we must take? We know the answer. It's love. In our sacred scriptures, love is more than a thought or a feeling. Love is not just a noun. Love is also a verb. Our Torah uses the word chesed to express the kind of love that God demonstrates to us. Chesed is often translated as love, steadfast love, or loving kindness. And Hesed is at the core of Jewish spirit because Chesed is love in action. Many Jewish thinkers view Chesed as the primary value which contributes to Tikkun Olam, our mandate to repair the world. Chesed, love, enables us to pull ourselves out of the mud we're stuck in and to pull others from the mud they may also be stuck in. Love is how we offer an outstretched arm or receive an outstretched arm that is offered by others. Rosh Hashanah is our special time to contemplate tshuva. The liturgy helps us acknowledge the mud our lives have become stuck in. And we're supposed to commit ourselves to change for the better. We make resolutions to better ourselves, to change our priorities, to lead happier and healthier lives. Motivation to accomplish these resolutions isn't the problem. But it takes more than motivation to free ourselves from the mud we're stuck in. We have to work for it. And we have to work at pulling others from the mud they're also stuck in. In every circumstance, faith keeps us open to possibilities. Hope spurs us to action. And love is the force that actively pulls us and others out of the mud. If you remember nothing else from my remarks today, remember that it is love that saves others and saves us. Love is a choice. And we need to appreciate the many ways we can move love into action. First, when we extend loving kindness to someone, we make life better. The opportunities to show kindness are all around us. We just have to take notice and then take action. Things we can do. Call a friend. Write a note of encouragement. Invite someone for coffee. Share a compliment. Say please and thank you. Hold a door open. Allow a car into your lane during traffic. Send flowers. Volunteer to help. Forgive easily. And then really forget. Let's continually extend love in small and large acts of kindness. Secondly, love is the continuous practice of feeling empathy with another person's plight. When someone is hurting, empathy is the ability to understand how they feel and to fully identify with them. Empathy allows us to connect with another in a meaningful and profound way. Often, empathy cures another person's loneliness. And love in the form of empathy takes work. But when we practice it successfully, it doesn't float away in the choppiness of life's rough waves. Third, love in the form of true listening is a gift. And listening is a skill we have to learn. It's the gift of our full attention and full presence. And I know this is going to be hard. That means no phones, no multitasking, fully present. Listening includes the loving attitude and practice that clearly demonstrates, I hear you, and most importantly, I'm here for you. And listening isn't about fixing the other person's problem. It's about making the other person feel valued, honored, really heard, and really loved. Sometimes we won't know exactly the right thing to say or do. Often we won't be able to remove the burden of the other. But we always have the ability to have eye contact, to be fully present, and really listen. Fourth, love is consistently being present. It's showing up over and over, especially when the going gets tough. It's challenging to love someone who sees things differently from the way we do, or who experiences the world differently from the way we do. People who are in a state of pain and suffering, they can be difficult. They can be difficult to be with. Yet this is when it's most important to be loving. The people we love need to know we're here for the long haul, not because it's easy, but because we love them regardless of this difficulty. Fifth, we need to continually show our love in small ways. The most precious articles of love are the items that cost no money. Sometimes it's helping with a chore, cleaning up the kitchen, running an errand, giving someone a break. Grand gestures may be nice, but usually it's not what's needed. When someone is hurting, they usually need a hug, a pat on the back, or our mere presence to let them know we care. And finally, love is steadfast. We can't offer the fullness of our love when it's conditional and when we expect something in return. Love is not transactional. We love not to get something, but because love changes the way the world works for the better. Loving in small, constant ways are the actions of greatest value. COVID-19 has inflicted suffering, loss, isolation. It's taken a heavy toll on all of us, but faith, hope, and love are always available to us. I started my remarks by wishing everyone L'Shana Tova, a much happier, healthier, and more peaceful new year. We can all make that prayerful greeting come true. With our faith, let's lift our eyes to see God's light. With hope, let's look at the miracles that surround us. And finally, and most importantly, with love, let's offer an outstretched arm and grasp an outstretched arm that is offered by another. Let's rededicate ourselves to chesed, the acts of loving kindness that enable us to pull ourselves out of the mud that we're stuck in and to pull others from the mud they may also be stuck in. This new year, let's ensure that steadfast love is our way of action. L'Shana Tova, a happy, healthy new year.